Welcome to the Heat Pumped podcast, where we talk about heat pumps, the equipment, the installations, and everything to install more heat pumps across the country. I'm your host, Shrey Sudhakar, and my guest today is RJ Cilley, the CEO of Voomi Supply. Voomi Supply is a national distributor of HVAC equipment. So, RJ, tell me about Voomi and what do you guys do?
Yeah, so we are we're a B2B e-commerce distributor, right? So what we've really built over the last 5 or 6 years is we have gone out and really built a great supply channel, working with distributors and OEMs to stand up a national sales channel for our partners and also unlock kind of this nationwide supply that we've built. So focusing on the B2B, we have a bunch of different customers, but we are really a B2B distributor, e-commerce distributor at heart.
I guess you don't come from a traditional HVAC background, right? Like,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about where you came from and how you ended up in HVAC.
Yeah, totally. My career, beginning of my career was, kind of more on the finance, investment banking and investment side, but it was always around consumer and retail. And I went and really jumped into being focused on e-commerce for the past decade. So I've done the apparel industry, I've done the home industry, I've done the supplements industry. So I've just done e-commerce in a lot of different places. And, I met the founders of Voomi and what they were doing. And, whether you're selling a dress, whether you're selling a widget, whether you're selling a furnace, there's actually a lot of similarities in e-commerce. And that's where my background rooted in e-commerce, obviously learning the market. I spent the last 12 months really understanding kind of the ins and outs of how HVAC works. And we do plumbing and electrical and a couple other things. But that was really where I've spent my time. But bringing a great e-commerce playbook to this industry is really what we're about. And so my background has been focused on that and, continuing to learn every single day about this industry.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit of what you learned over the past year. And a lot of our listeners are not necessarily people in the HVAC industry. They might be homeowners looking to get a heat pump for their own house. So I would love for you to kind of peel the curtain back a little bit and tell us like how the sausage is made.
Yeah, so when I did my kind of announcement on LinkedIn and stuff like that, I had a bunch of people reach out to me. Somehow it spread to people in HVAC and whatnot. And some really good people that I would call were just if you need a sounding block, you want to chat. And there was some really core people there. And they said, RJ, this industry about connections, right? And that's very cliche, but I will tell you, coming from different industries, it is about the people in this industry. So getting to connect it around, and from OEMs to distributors to manufacturing reps, all the different people that kind of play in this ecosystem. That was for me trying to figure out kind of how all of this works and where Voomi can kind of fit into that, right? And so for me, understanding the different dynamics and where we can kind of fit in and be powerful and helpful to a part of the industry that might not being served or is just up and coming, that for me has been like the 12 months of kind of crash 101 in HVAC. Other than me looking up what parts and pieces mean when I go to GPT and stuff like that, I'm still learning that every day. But I had a nice experience where someone came to fix my HVAC unit. I had him take it apart for me and I learned all about it. And I feel like I've just been a student of the game, which has been fun. But I think the ecosystem and how all the distributors and OEMs and all of that works together, every single day I've kind of learned something new. And that is just every day I'm on the hunt for more knowledge in that space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess from like a high level, like 1,000-foot standpoint, like how does it work today and how do you see like e-commerce changing how that works?
Yeah, I think I was really intrigued when I first heard about the model on, OEM to master distributor, sub distributor, the distributor to contractor and end customer. You have all these steps along the way. As when I was like learning about it, I was like, how does everyone make money along the way, right? What am I missing on, just markup on markup on markup? And I feel what I have learned is that there is a place to kind of have your niche and really kind of, I'll call it make your money and provide the value to the consumer, whoever it may be. And for me, I looked at it and I said, I don't think I really understood the trade back and forth between distribution, the contractor who can't get their hands on the long tail part. Like there are just different places that everyone can kind of fit in the ecosystem. And then when you do, you got to be really great at that. So I think about specifically Voomi, where we have this really large catalog. We might not be the first or second stop for a contractor, right? We might be a third choice, but when we can play real value in that kind of second, third choice, whatever it may be, that's where we need to be great. And I think for me and our organization, focusing on that, and that will evolve over time, right? We will play in the commoditized parts in the future and stuff like that. And we have everything, but where we're going to really stand for and kind of grow from, that's where, we're focused on and really pushing there. But there's other people, brick and mortar distributor who only carries, 10,000 SKUs. They're really great at those 10,000 SKUs. How do they get their hands on other things might be in a slightly different model than they've used in the past. And that is just the evolution and how e-commerce and digital and B2B all kind of evolve in these industries.
I think that's a great perspective there with that 10,000 SKUs, because I think if you've never been inside an HVAC supply house, it's pretty wild. Like you walk to the counter and like there's a few things in like the front office, like there's boxes of bolts and all of that. But when you walk behind the curtain, like in
Yeah.
the restricted area that like the actual stock people work, like there's shelves and shelves of ductwork. It's like you have 6-inch duct, 7-inch duct, 8-inch duct, 9-inch duct, right? There's just I don't think I've ever worked in an industry that just has like so much variations of parts. And then even if it's like a certain type of zip tie, you probably have 17 different vendors that make it, like 8 different lengths, like maybe 5 of those will work in your application. And so I think it's just like mind-boggling how much you need to stock to actually
Yeah.
like run a full.
And that's one of the things that, Voomi, we do really well, right? It is physically impossible to carry all of these SKUs, right? It's physically and economically just doesn't make sense, right? And so for us to what we've done is really kind of aggregated the supply across this, from a nation perspective, from, every single SKU. That aggregation is really powerful because somebody needs it somewhere, right? There's an imperfect balance of supply and demand across the US, right? Somebody's going to have, a 30 store chain in Texas is going to have a control board that nobody can get in the Northeast. Someone's going to need it, right? And so that kind of model, and it's not just, talk about Voomi, but in general, that trade between distribution and everyone kind of working together, if you will, that's a really, really powerful unlock. And I've seen that in a lot of industries where that kind of B2B mindset of digitizing the inventory, making it available, whatever it may be, that is really powerful. And I think what we kind of bring to the ecosystem is that aggregation of everything. And for us in a business model, not having to physically carry all of that can be really, really powerful. So, and it's just, to your point, it's millions of SKUs, but it compounds every year because SKUs go obsolete, but people still need the obsolete SKUs. Then the new SKUs come in, and it's just like it will continue to grow. And it's a really fascinating kind of market that is like you're going to have, 10 million SKUs in the future, if you will. So,
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's particularly interesting when it comes to heat pumps, because there are parts of the country where like heat pump equipment just hasn't made much inroads. A lot of contractors aren't familiar. And so I was talking with Nate Adams on a previous issue of this podcast, and he was talking about how in Chicago, like none of the supply houses stocked any heat pump equipment. And you had to drive hundreds of miles to like actually find a distributor that could get equipment. And so
yeah.
I think one thing I'm thinking about is like perhaps your e-commerce model will help enable a lot of this technology to permeate in places that like don't necessarily have the contractor awareness or willingness yet.
Yeah, the internet's a really good tool to democratize stuff, right? Democratize pricing, democratize something that is taken off on the West Coast, right? If you think about San Francisco and heat pumps and those type of things, like
Yeah.
there's a trend that it will go somewhere, but you got to find out about it, right? And the internet is this kind of like, the democratizer of all to get information flowing. So yes, and we see pockets of that of, where people order stuff. It's kind of taking off in this market, so we know that there's demand for it. And that is a powerful piece of data that number one, we can use to go and market to and stuff like that. But you do see these pockets of trends where you're like, yeah, we've never sold a heat pump in X, Y, and Z city. Is that a trend or what is that about? And maybe it's because the market just doesn't really know about it, or the local market hasn't pushed it and maybe there's a vested interest for it or whatever it may be, but really interesting trends that you can see. But the internet is just a great democratizer of it all.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess I'd love to talk a little bit about like the old school HVAC distribution, right? Like you said, this is a very relationships based business. I have pretty strong relationships with the counter guys at my local HVAC distributors. Like, I think those have come in handy when I needed I needed a part tomorrow, and they would like bend over backwards and like expedite something from a different branch across the country, and like have a guy like drive it out to my job site and like make sure it's there. Like, how do you think about, like, I guess an e-commerce website in some ways, like, it eliminates all relationships, right? Like, I can click a button, I can get the part I need, but I don't have like a guy in the same way. Like, how do you think about that, and how does that like connect with contractors in
Yeah,
your
I
experience?
think on the point is I've seen this in another industry where, the e-commerce was, slow to adopt, but everybody is talking about it. And there's actually a lot of people who are leaning into it, right? To the 150 plus partnerships that we have on our site. People know this is the way to go. So I think it is actually being embraced more than numbers would say, but it is like it will take time. And that's kind of just when we talk to kind of brick and mortar distributors and we tell about our model, they all kind of want in. And that's why they come to us, and that's why we have those discussions. So I do think there is like adoption is coming. It will take time, but like people want to do it. I think to your question on like taking away the relationship, we still, our business, as much as we're an e-commerce player, we have a large offline demand. 50% of our kind of calls to our service center are pre-purchase, meaning they have questions about pricing, availability, all the things that they do when you go to that local supply house, they're
Sure.
actually still doing because that is what they have been trained to do in the offline world. But the online world isn't, they're just not going to change for it overnight. So you as an e-commerce retailer actually have to adopt to what was, still picking up the phone. And we embrace it. We have a large service center team that is technical, that can answer those questions. We have a sales team that can do that. We can help with technical questions and stuff like that. So that is still something that you just can't abandon. And I've seen a lot of people who say, we're disrupting an industry, not Voomi specifically, but other industries we're disrupting. You're not actually going to make as much progress if you don't embrace what the great things about the industry are, which is that hand-to-hand touch and personal white glove service. And when you go to that brick and mortar, you know your person and they are super reliable. And so for us to be able to do that in a digital sense with still maybe picking up the phone call, but the aftermarket, once they buy something's following up and saying, hey, you bought that air filter, it's coming time. Do you want to buy another one? That's like the easy example to talk about. But predicting what they need and being there when they need it, that is where you really unlock the power of an offline and an online model. And for us, we embrace that all day. And I'll bet that 25% of our business, I'm making it up, will still be over the phone for the next 5 or 10 years. That is not going to change. But there is a world and a different, kind of generation coming up that says, hey, I'm self-sufficient, and everything with GPT and kind of generative AI and those types of things, it is going to make the consumer, the contractor, the independent contractor way more powerful, that they're going to be able to potentially solve some problems on their own. And we, Voomi, have to be ready for that because we need to be, plugged into all the LLMs and being, GEO instead of SEO ready for when people ask that question to the LLM. We got to show up and we got to be really, really sharp on those.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. And you mentioned kind of like you see your sweet spot as being like that third stop where they like maybe called a couple other supply houses, they couldn't get the part, and you're that place to get that hard to get part, that one thing that like no one can find anywhere. Like, do you see yourself pushing forward to being like the one-stop shop?
Totally. We have a cohort of both, right? We have a cohort that
Sure.
came in because that was probably the third option, right? And they
Sure.
said, "Hey, I couldn't find it in my local supply house," and I Googled and I found out what Voomi was, right? We are capturing that customer and having them stay with us. That's important to us, right? That is going to be the model that they look and say, "Hey, I don't need to drive, I don't need to do X, Y, and Z." That's going to continue. So we are always trying to move people to being first, second, or whatever option it may be. But because the nature of our catalog and stuff like that, we are just going to get a lot of people that are kind of, have exhausted options and, whoa, Voomi has digitized this product and they can ship it to my door in 3 days. That's a great value proposition. But the better better that we become, the more supply we get, faster shipping, the better pricing, all of those things, that will lead to, I don't need to make a trade-off, right? I always use this example is like, when did you stop buying toothpaste at your local pharmacy? You stopped buying it when you didn't need to make the trade-off, right? Someone had it, they could get it to you fast, it was reliable, and the price was right. You said, okay, I don't need to make a trade-off, so why would I go and walk or do something? Until you conquer those, you're never going to fully be able to capture that demand. And that is what we're on kind of a path every single day to get better in those areas.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious, like I know you rely a lot on your partnerships with like other distributors. Like, do you ever see a world where Voomi also ends up having some brick and mortar element to it? I think the one thing I think about is like Amazon used to be entirely online, but now there's like an Amazon grocery store down the road for me, like
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
how do you think about that?
Yeah, models always evolve, right? So you never say no, right? Amazon in
Yeah,
1995 would have said, we're never going to own a brick and mortar, and then they buy Whole Foods, right? So it's
yep,
like,
exactly.
no problem. So the models can always evolve. We have so much opportunity in our existing model. And as you know, as a startup and, as you're growing, maniacal focus is like the most important thing to do. Like you can, if you get too wide, you start not focusing on your core. So for me, that is what we're focused on every single day is enabling our partners and building our business. But, we're always open to evolve, but right now head down on kind of our existing model.
Makes sense. And there are like other e-commerce players in HVAC, right? Now, and in many of those cases, they run their own warehousing. They hold the stock themselves. Like, I guess talk me through like why one way or another makes sense, and like why you're excited about your.
Yeah, I have a ton of respect for kind of the other HVAC player, e-commerce players, right?
Yeah,
They took a big leap early in the day, and to an industry that wasn't quite ready for it, and they plowed forward. Same with Voomi, right? Voomi has been this business for 5 or 6 years now. An early leap was taken and said, hey, this is where the trend is going to go. I think where I think about, which we talked about in our model, it is physically impossible, like I said, to own every single SKU, right? It just will
sure,
not make economical sense. You won't get the turn. You'll be sitting and you'll spend money on cash that goes out your door that doesn't come back in. So it can't be done. So I think to focus on that, longer expanded catalog that we're doing today, that is just where our sweet spot is and what we've been able to really do well over the last 5 or 6 years. So that's where I like, to your point, models evolve, and you might look at it and say, hey, you could, potentially make more margin by, having a different model in the future. But I think there's a lot of space for everyone in this ecosystem, right? When you look at penetration of e-commerce, you'll hear numbers about 7 to 10%. That's actually, in my opinion, slightly over exaggerated, because a lot of that is just a different online portal ordering that isn't really a national e-commerce that you and I think about when we order on e-commerce sites. It's really probably more in the 2 to 3% when you think about national players that ship nationally and all that type of stuff. So the point is, e-commerce will get to some type of penetration, 10, 20, 30, whatever it may be. And the people who have kind of started early, they're going to benefit from the natural tailwind. So I look in and say, there's going to be a couple big players in this industry. Voomi is going to be one of them, but it is not a winner take all. And as I said before, everyone's model can flex into kind of their strength and be really good at, one or two things and have a really big market for that.
makes sense. We've talked a lot about contractors. Do you see them as your primary customers, or
Yeah,
are
it is.
homeowners and yeah,
Yeah, it is our primary customer. I'll kind of get to other cohorts and stuff like that, but it is the number one that when we market to, we're thinking about. They have, high retention, all the things that you would want out of like a customer cohort that you look at. So that is focus, right? And when we get signals that say, hey, this person is a contractor and they're looking for something, our marketing ears go up and say, hey, we need to really, really go after this. And, something that's very interesting in this industry is there's not a ton of discovery. Like in my old worlds in fashion, right? It was like, you need an inspiration for what to wear tomorrow. When you're searching for something online and it's a part number, you're not just Googling it because you want to. You have a demand and you have a need. And so when we see that and those signals, we jump on it as fast as we can. So that's where, from a contractor perspective, that is where we are focused. But I would say, in kind of the trend that I think you're hitting on in a lot of your material, we don't call it the do it DIY. We call it the do it for me customer, right? Where there's a lot of free research I need someone technical because I don't really trust myself to handle electric and those type of things. But I was able to take it a pretty far away, learn what pricing may be, and be smarter going into a conversation, whether they procure it themselves or they say, hey, contractor, here's what I'm seeing for pricing, whatever it may be. That customer is growing, and that cohort, I don't think there's any stopping them with what we talked about with GPT and LLMs, putting more power into them. I mean, if you go to YouTube, as you know, there is so much powerful how to change a capacitor, how to do these type of things. It becomes less scary the more information you have. And it's like, I don't think that is going to take over the market and 80% of the market is going to switch to a do it for me customer, but that trend isn't going to go backwards, right? If it's 2, 3, 4, 5% today, it will get to 5, 10%. So there's growth there. So we're not taking our eyes off of it. And as our model is like, we don't have a paywall where you have to log in or anything. People can buy on our site. We have, restrictions based on certain regulations and stuff like that. But in general, if you want to buy and you have the sophistication and you're able to prove that you can do it, you're going to be able to buy it on the internet. So for us, we kind of look at every customer and say it's an opportunity. Are there more that there's others that we spend slightly more money on? Sure. But we do look at it and say there's opportunity for a lot of different customer cohorts that we can serve.
Makes sense. When you talk about part numbers, are you thinking at all about like generics? Like say, um, you have a lot of people searching for a certain control board. Like say there's like the train part number. Is there like a Voomi part number that could replace that? Is that something you see yourself moving towards? And
Yeah, I mean, listen, genuine OEM is kind of like we do a lot, right? So to be
yeah,
fair, we sell,
yeah,
we sell replacement, and that's just some obsolete items you can't get the genuine, so you need
right,
it, right? So
right,
there's a
right.
need for it in a lot of different places. I will tell you the e-commerce where you have to be really good at is being explicit about those things, right? Because you go into the counter at a local supply house, they'll tell you, hey, this is genuine, this is replacement, whatever it may be. Online, when you're dealing with all this data and you're building a catalog and stuff like that, you need to be really sharp. And one thing that in this industry, I think nobody will argue with is the data is really, really sparse and it is light, it's weak, it's disconnected. So getting something and saying, is this genuine, is it not? You need to be really careful about that because the consumer is going to open it up and they have an expectation. You better meet what the expectation was, right? Was it genuine? Was it a replacement? Whatever. So I think that's the most important thing, that when you get that right, you put in the consumer's hand, right? We might promote something more than others, but if a consumer wants to make that trade-off because they say, hey, this is better, or a contractor wants to make the trade-off, as long as you give them that information and it's at their power to be the gatekeeper to make that decision, then you've done as an e-commerce player what you need to do. And for our model where we have a big catalog, we'll serve both, but we need to be very precise and get that right, because if not, you'll trust bust and people won't want to come back because they think you've done a swap or whatever it may be. Being really good at that is the most important thing.
And how have you found that you've been able to be good at that? Because that's really hard, right? It's like, how do you know what the control board for this one furnace from 1983 is, and like make sure that all of the documentation for it is accurate?
Yeah, I would say data in this space is really about aggregation and using as much context clues as you can to make the right decision, right? And sometimes it's handed you on a silver platter, right? There's some OEMs who are really good who have said, hey, we need to digitize this and we got to get it ready for e-commerce, whatever it is. And there's some that you just have to go and you have to play a partial information game where you are aggregating and saying, okay, two different sources. Well, I'll use weight as an example, right? If I have a compressor, right, and I get it from two different sources, and one says it's 1 pound, another person says it's 50 pounds, and I know that compressors in general are 45 pounds, whatever it may be, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm more likely to trust this source than the other source that's probably wrong. So you have to use that. And that's where that's where GPT and AI and all these things are really good at saying, hey, we have a confidence ratio of, XY of 95%. We believe it. It's not perfect. And that's where we then need to make the decision that do we feel good enough to sell it because we have put the partial information together to something that we're loud and proud of. So it's a complex equation, right? And there's been a lot of people who have tried to solve it and we're all getting better at it. But there are some pieces and parts where you're just like, it's very hard to tell. And that's where, you have to make the choice whether you're going to take the gamble or not. And, for me, it's really hard to not have it, super buttoned up, because the biggest thing, as we talked about before, when you trust bust and someone orders something and it's not what they expected, they go back to and say, this is why I don't order online, right? So you got to be really, really good at that.
Sounds good. And like, I guess, what are your thoughts on heat pumps in general, and like, how do those fit in the broader like HVAC ecosystem and
Yeah, I
like
mean, listen,
your growth?
I love innovation, right? So
Yeah,
you look at any industry and you say, how are we going to innovate, right? And there's new types of there's new things coming in the future that are innovative. This is obviously something that has really started to take some share. I do think the educational thing, it's funny. I actually sent your video that you published the other day to my team to really educate them on here's what heat pumps are and stuff like that. We're an HVAC company, we know these things, but sometimes, it is an information game that getting that out and making people aware is really important. So I do think there is momentum in the space. I think it's great technology. I think there's a lot from an energy efficiency place perspective. Like I said, seeing it adopted in markets like San Francisco and stuff like that. Is that just a trend? Where is it going to go to next? What are like markets? So I think it's going to have a great place in this industry, but I do think there's an education adoption that as every single day, more will come out and people will get educated and then they'll make the decision based on that.
yeah. Totally. What are you excited about with Voomi? I know you've been growing pretty rapidly even in the past year or so.
Yeah, no, the business is, the business has, really found a good groove in terms of our model, right? Our biggest asset is bringing on new partners to the platform, right? Whether it's OEMs, distributors, whatever it may be, we can enable that, national sales channel overnight. And so for us, that is just, we are maniacally focused on every single day. So I'm excited that this market is, thousands of distributors and, hundreds of OEMs just continuing to chip away and becoming the authority for supply on the internet. That is just, we will always have that muscle building every single day. It's like, I feel like I know every single distributor, and then I find out a new one on the West Coast that I've never heard of. And it's like, awesome. That's very humbling to say I don't know who every single distributor is. So that is like when I think about what we will keep chipping away at, that's the supply side. On the demand side, it is just continuing to build a great e-commerce business, right? Super reliable from a transaction perspective, speedy delivery, and then adding value in other ways of just displaying an item, right? To, giving you an alert that you need to replace an item or predicting your next move. All of those things about really understanding your customer and providing the most value to them. I think that is just the model that we will keep building. There is going to be great innovation. We're going to do, new channels and new things, but for us, that always on core, that is going to be like just at our root every single day. I do think the AI, lens to this industry around building the catalog and getting the consumer through that is what is moving so fast right now that I'm looking at and saying Voomi's really well positioned because we are definitely like on the forefront of e-commerce in the industry. And so we are like, we already have a website. So now how do we get into that next level? Every single day, the team is thinking about how we're going to kind of be positioned in this new world of e-commerce. And I think that is, as a, decade plus in e-commerce, if you think about it, the last 20 years, we're still kind of doing the same thing. You're going to a website, you're looking at a catalog, you're ordering and whatnot. That is going to change over the next, it's changing now over the next 18 months. So we just need to be ready for that. And every single day, that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting that you bring that up because I think one thing that struck me is just like how the transactions operate in HVAC. A lot of times it's like you just rattle off a list of I need like 50 zip screws and I need two 20 by 15 plenums and a thing of bubble wrap and some
Yep.
sticky tape, and like that magically turns into an order list and
Yep.
like shows up to a job site. Like
Yep.
I come from a background where it's like you're very particular on part numbers and you're very specific, but I think there's a lot of fuzziness in how the actual industry operates, and so it's cool to see how you're thinking about that. And it sounds like maybe that's where e-commerce might be moving too.
Yeah, and I think what you talked about is like being that one-stop shop, right? So right now, if you have that entire list and you have to go to 5 different places, that's cumbersome, right? So
Totally.
Voomi somewhat acting as this kind of procurement agent for whoever it may be, whether it's a contractor or an institutional buyer, that is really powerful that they can look at it and say, hey, I can get all my shopping done here. I can have it delivered to my door in 3 days. The bet planning, the better for us because if you have time and you don't need it tomorrow or overnight or emergency fix. So I think as I talk about the model evolving and what we're continuing to focus on, being able to be that one-stop shop with all the selection and great pricing, will be a game changer that every day we're working on.
Love it. Well, I guess, is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with or any asks?
No, I think to my beginning point on this industry is about people and stuff like that. It's been I love reading your content, love what you're doing and educating the market and stuff like that. So I love doing these things and meeting great people in the industry. So appreciate you having me on and looking forward to making great connections through this publication.
Amazing. Thanks, RJ, for joining us.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely check out Voomi Supply and give Heat Pump a follow. We're on YouTube, Spotify, all your typical platforms, and you can also check us out at heatpumped.org. Thanks so much.
Great stuff.